AGI. This word is tossed about a lot, to the point where it kind of feels like gimmicky. But when we are talking about it, our actual intent is clear. An intelligence that is so capable it could drastically change the current world. I mean, curing diseases, eradicating injustice and poverty. So many have shared their views on this topic, and with them joins Dario Amodei, the CEO of Anthropic, who has shared a blog post predicting what could possibly happen in the next 5 to 10 years after we have achieved AGI. The title of the essay is Machines of Loving Grace. He derives the title from the poem All Watched Over by Machines of Loving Grace. The poem beautifully says at the end, I like to think it has to be of a cybernetic ecology where we are free of our labors and join back to nature, return to our mammal brothers and sisters, and all washed over by machines of loving grace. That was awesome, wasn't it? With that being said, I ask you to like this video, then we shall proceed. So, if we talk about Dario Amodei, he has a background in neuroscience, which will be evident as we go through this essay. So, talking about the essay, I have narrowed it down to focus on the key topics, but I will paste the link to the article in my description. So, he starts by saying, in this essay, I try to sketch out what that upside might look like, what a world with powerful AI might look like if everything goes right. Of course, no one can know the future with any certainty or precision, and the effects of powerful AI are likely to be even more unpredictable than past technological changes. So, all of this is unavoidably going to consist of guesses, but I am aiming for at least educated and useful guesses, which capture the flavor of what will happen even if most details end up being wrong. I am including lots of details mainly because I think a concrete vision does more to advance discussion than a highly hedged and abstract one. He then goes on to share his thoughts about when we can have AGI. First, he says that he doesn't like the term AGI and prefers to refer to it as powerful AI. So, about powerful AI, he says, obviously, many people are skeptical that powerful AI will be built soon, and some are skeptical that it will ever be built at all. I think it could come as early as 2026, though there are also ways it could take much longer. But for the purposes of this essay, I would like to put these issues aside, assume it will come reasonably soon, and focus on what happens in the 5 to 10 years after that. And then he goes on talking about the characteristics of such an AI. He says, in terms of intelligence, it will be smarter than a Nobel Prize winner in most relevant fields, and it can prove unsolved mathematical theorems, write extremely good novels, and write difficult code bases from scratch. In terms of modality, it will have access to text, audio, video, mouse, and keyboard control, anything a human is able to do in the virtual world, including taking actions on the internet, directing experiments, watching videos, and making videos. And it will do all of this with a skill that exceeds the most capable humans in the world in that field. Then he says there could be millions of instances of this kind of AI that would absorb information and generate actions at 10x or 100x the human speed. He refers to these as country of geniuses, which does sound astounding to me if you ask me. And we will also be having reference to this phrase country of geniuses more in this article, so do keep that in mind. So having this scale of acceleration and productivity, we might start to think of singularity, a superior intelligence that solves every problem that has ever existed. But Dario says this is less likely. He says, the problem with such an assumption is that intelligence will not be a limitation, but real physical and practical limits will be. This country of geniuses will be powerful, but it isn't magic fairy dust. So, what are these practical limits he's talking about? He says that no matter the intelligence explosion we are seeing, we are limited by the world we interact with. He says the world only moves so fast. Cells and animals run at a fixed speed, so experiments on them will take a certain amount of time. And many times these experiments have to be done in sequence. For example, he says, developing a cancer cure can only be reduced to a minimum time which cannot be reduced further. Next, he talks about the lack of data. For example, he says that in the field of particle physics, scientists have developed a wide range of theories, but they lack the data to choose between them because particle accelerated data is so limited. He then talks about intrinsic complexity. By that, he means that there are some inherently unpredictable or chaotic problems that even the most powerful AI cannot solve or predict. He gives the example of the three body problem, which means finding the exact motion of 3 point masses that are revolving around each other using Newton's law of motion. He says problems like these can't be solved by this powerful AI. He then talks about constraint from human. So many things cannot be done without breaking laws. Some experiments on human can't be allowed based on humanitarian grounds. Even if an AI suggests it, we can't do it. And if we come up with an AI that doesn't care about us, then it is essentially a dystopia. Lastly, he talks about physical laws, like we can't cross the speed of light. Silicon chips can only have so many transistors per square centimeter before they become unreliable, and so on. Now, so these were the limitations that will come our way when to reach singularity according to him. Now, done with the limitations, he then explains five key areas where he thinks AI will bring drastic impact. So, the first one is biology and health. He says people have been skeptical about AI's impact on healthcare and biology, but with the revolutionary breakthroughs of AlphaFold, which got its creators a Nobel Prize in chemistry, that is changing pretty quickly. But he clearly says that is not what he is talking about. He says, I want to repeat this because it's the most common misconception that comes up when I talk about AI's ability to transform biology. I am not talking about AI as merely a tool to analyze data. In line with the definition of powerful AI at the beginning of this essay, I am talking about using AI to perform direct and improve upon nearly everything biologists do. And with that kind of AI, here is what he predicts. My basic prediction is that AI enabled biology and medicine will allow us to compress the progress that human biologists would have achieved over the next 50 to 100 years into just 5 to 10 years. I'll refer to this as the compressed 21st century. The idea that after powerful AI is developed, we will in a few years make all the progress in biology and medicine that we would have made in the whole 21st century. And he then states what specific thing he expects. First, reliable prevention and treatment of nearly all natural infectious diseases. Whether infectious diseases will be fully eradicated from the world is something that depends more on poverty and inequality when such healthcare is achieved, which we will further discuss. Secondly, he talks about elimination of most types of cancer. He says death rates from cancer are dropping at a rate of 2% per year. AI will help to make possible treatment regimens very finely adapted to the individualized genome of the cancer. These are very expensive today, but with the help of AI, can be scaled. That being said, he also says that there is a chance that some very rare cases of cancer might not be fully eradicated. Next, he talks about effective cure of genetic diseases. He talks about greatly improved embryo screening and better methods of CRISPR will cure most genetic diseases in existing people. He also talks about prevention of Alzheimer's. He says, we have had a hard time finding its actual reason, but AI will be able to solve this and it could be prevented with very simple interventions. However, he admits that damage from already having Alzheimer's may be difficult to reverse. And he says similarly, treatment of all other ailments like diabetes, obesity, heart disease, autoimmune diseases, or more can also be cured with the help of AI. He then talks about biological freedom. And by that, he means the freedom to choose your physical appearance, to be whatever you want, as all biological processes will be under your control. Lastly, he talks about a very interesting topic, doubling of the human lifespan. He says already the human life expectancy has increased to almost 2x from 40 years to 75 in the 20th century. And in this compressed 21st century, that is, in the next few years, it could double again to 150. And to support that, there are already drugs that increase maximum lifespan in rats by 25 to 50%. He says that we may be able to reach a point where most alive today could live as long as they want, but he says that there is no guarantee that it is biologically possible. So, as you guys know, bubonic plague and smallpox have been the reason for a lot of deaths, but those are a point of history for us. He says, many of my friends and colleagues are raising children, and when those children grow up, I hope that any mention of disease will sound to them the way scurvy, smallpox, or bubonic plague sound to us. That generation will also benefit from increased biological freedom and self expression, and with luck, may also be able to live as long as they want. So, we talked about biology and health, right? The next topic is neuroscience and mind. Here he says all things that we have already talked about in the healthcare sector, that acceleration also applies here. But one thing he says would add to the basic picture is that some things that we have learned about AI itself in the last few years could also help in advancing neuroscience. He gave one example that a computational mechanism discovered by interpretability researchers in AI systems was recently discovered in the brains of mice. Then he goes on to talk about four key points. I will briefly mention them. First is improvement in molecular biology, chemistry, and genetics, and developing drugs that could help us cure mental illness or fix our mood, etc. He talks about improvements in fine grained neural measurements and intervention. This is the ability to measure what individual neurons or neuronal circuits are doing. He talks about advanced computational neuroscience as well. And lastly, he talks about behavioral intention. He mentions an AI coach who always helps you to be the best version of yourself, who studies your interaction and helps you learn to be more effective. This seems very promising. He says everyday problems that we don't think of as clinical diseases, like feeling less focused, procrastinating, feeling fearful or anxious, could also be mitigated without any side effects. He then talks about mind uploading, the idea of capturing the pattern and dynamics of a human brain and instantiating them in software. He says this is possible in principle, but in practice, it faces significant technological and societal challenges. And he says even with powerful AI, he doesn't think it will happen in the 5 to 10 year window he is talking about. So we have talked about biology and health and neuroscience and mind. Third, and one of the most important thing, is economic development and poverty. So talking about the current state of living standard, he says that the GDP per capita is $75,000 in the United States, whereas in sub-Saharan African countries, it is around $2,000. And when he talks about the impact of AI on economic development and poverty, he says that he is not so confident that AI can address this effectively. But he does mention things that will propagate in the developing countries as well. He first talks about health intervention and says 5 to 10 years is a reasonable time for a good fraction, maybe 50% of AI driven healthcare to propagate to even the poorest countries. Then he talks about economic growth. Several East Asian economies were able to sustain 10% annual GDP growth rates. He mentions AI finance ministers and central bankers, with the help of which we could hope for a 20% annual GDP growth rate in the developing world, with the extra 10% coming from AI enabled economic decisions and the natural spread of AI accelerated technologies. He says if such a feat is achieved, then sub Saharan African countries could reach the current GDP of China in 5 to 10 years, and other developing countries could reach the US GDP. But he clearly says this is a dream scenario. When it comes to food security, he talks about another green revolution which will help close the gap between the developing and the developed world. When talking about climate change, he says AI could help to improve the removal of atmospheric carbon, and then he also talks about the usage of lab grown meat. On a different note, he talks about the opt out problem. He says AI enabled benefits are good, but people who are least able to make good decisions may opt out of these technologies. I mean, the movements against AI and not using the benefits. Yeah, so these could lead to the creation of a dystopian class. But at the same time, he says such historical anti technology movements slowly fade away and people eventually do adopt them, especially when it's a matter of individual choice. So, next comes the fourth topic, peace and governance. As we saw in the poverty and economic growth, he was skeptical, but when it comes to peace and governance, he is clear. He sees no strong reason to believe that AI will advance democracy and peace. He clearly says that democracy should have the upper hand compared to authoritarianism when it comes to these powerful AIs. He talks about a coalition of democracies that seek to gain a clear advantage, and they could delay access to such AI and key resources like chips and semiconductor to these kinds of governments. Because he says AI powered authoritarianism seems too terrible to contemplate. And he says in the end they would give up their authoritarian government in order to receive all the benefits and not fight a superior foe. He says repressive governments survive by denying people a certain kind of common knowledge. According to what he says, the modern day example would be North Korea. Some people think of their leader as some kind of a demigod. He talks about Sercha Popovic, who helped to topple the Milosevic government in Serbia. He says that if everyone could have a pocket version of Popovic, one that dictators are powerless to block or censor, it could strengthen reformers and lead them to freedom. He also says that AI could improve our legal and judicial system, making them less biased. He doesn't suggest replacing judges all of a sudden, but they could have these AIs as aids. One more use case will be having a very thoughtful and informed AI whose job is to give you everything you are legally entitled to by the government in a way you can understand, and who also helps you comply with often confusing government rules. At last, we get into the most interesting and controversial topic, that is the fifth topic and the last topic, work and the meaning of life. We are already talking about a world where AI is functioning at a Nobel Prize level in all fields. So he says, someone might object, but with AI is doing everything, how will humans have meaning? For that matter, how will they survive economically? But he explained this with an example. Historically, hunter gatherer societies might have imagined that life is meaningless without hunting and various kinds of hunting related religious rituals, and would have imagined that our well fed technological society devoid of purpose. It is the same way we think of the AI age now. And then he also talks about the feeling that any task is meaningless because AI could do it better. For that, he says, most people are not the best in the world at anything, and it doesn't seem to bother them particularly much. Of course, today they can still contribute through comparative advantage and may derive meaning from the economic value they produce. But people also greatly enjoy activities that produce no economic value. He gives his example and he says, I spend plenty of time playing video games, swimming, walking around outside, and talking to friends, all of which generates zero economic value. So, having covered all these 5 points, giving his viewpoints, at last he says, the experience of watching a long held set of ideals materialize in front of us all at once, I think many will be literally moved to tears by it. So, having watched till the end, what do you guys think about his views? Do you have a viewpoint on such a utopian future? Do share your opinions. I would genuinely like to hear them and share mine with you. Take care, guys. See you guys in the next one.